We spent most of our time in Shenandoah National Park in Virginia and the Great Smoky Mountains National Park in North Carolina and Tennessee. We also visited many of the small towns and villages along the way. One memorable stop was in Mount Airy, North Carolina. How many of you have been to Mount Airy, North Carolina? A few of you. So those of you who have will know that Mount Airy was the hometown of Andy Griffith, and the town he had in mind when he invented the TV town of Mayberry. And today, the whole town is a celebration of Andy and Mayberry. On our first day there, we set off for the Andy Griffith Museum, which was quite enjoyable, but it was also a long, tiring walk up a big hill on a very hot day. I live in Florida now. I don't do hills. After seeing the museum, we descended that big hill and stopped at the bottom to wait for the traffic to clear so that we could cross the street. All of a sudden, from out of nowhere, a giant SUV pulled up in front of us. Now, when I say that it pulled up in front of us, I imagine you're picturing that the vehicle pulled up nice and neat and parallel to the sidewalk. But no, it was pulled up at an angle, nose into the sidewalk, so that most of the SUV was completely blocking one full lane of a two-lane road, and it was Main Street on a busy Saturday morning. The driver lowered her passenger window and hollered out, "Well, y'all are either tourists or you're doing a good impression of being tourists." And I said, "Yes, we were in fact tourists." And she said, "Well, y'all look tarred, and in North Carolina we spell that T-A-R-R-E-D, tarred." Now don't worry, I'm not trying to sell you anything. I run a B&B, but it's closed right now. I'm Cousin Emma. Here's my card. As the traffic started to back up behind her on Main Street, I leaned down through the passenger window to take her card, and she began frantically brushing dog hair off the passenger seat. "Will you just look at this mess? I love him, but Lord, does he make a mess." Now, about this time, I could sense some movement in my peripheral vision. It was Bob, and he was slowly backing away from Cousin Emma's car. He was afraid that she was going to get hit and her SUV would then knock us both over like a couple of dominoes. Well, somehow Cousin Emma knew just what he was thinking. "Don't you worry about those cars. They'll just slow down and go right around me. You just watch. They won't even beep their horns." And she was right. One by one, the other drivers stopped and waited patiently for an opening in the traffic in the other lane, and then they eased around her. Nobody beeped their horn, or shouted at her, or made obscene gestures at her, all of which would have happened if we had been in Boston, which is where I come from. Those North Carolina drivers are the most patient and polite drivers I've ever seen. You can spend a long time waiting at a four-way stop because no one wants to go first. Meanwhile, Cousin Emma continued with her uncanny powers of prediction. "Now, are y'all coming from the museum?" I nodded. "And I bet you're going across the street to see the courthouse next." I nodded again, still trying to figure out this one-woman welcoming committee. "And then will you be heading into town for some lunch?" "Yes," I answered. Cousin Emma was thrilled with our lunch plans. "Well, you'll be walking right past my house. The address is right there on that card. It's the oldest house in town. There's a big shady porch with some comfortable rocking chairs. I want you to sit in those chairs and just rest and relax for a while. I won't be there because we have a church fundraiser. And don't forget to go out back and see the old slave quarters. And don't mind the lawn. I know it needs mowing. I keep calling that guy, but he hasn't come yet. Oh, and don't pay any attention to that dog. He'll be whining. Oh, Lord, he'll be whining. He's been fed, he's been watered, he's been walked, he's fine." Well, eventually, Cousin Emma backed her big SUV onto Main Street and continued on her way to her church fundraiser. Bob and I continued across the street to the courthouse, and later we did stop by to see her beautiful house and slave quarters. And she was right, the lawn did need mowing. As we headed into town for lunch, we encountered a very different sort of welcoming committee, A small group of people were standing on a corner, screaming at the top of their lungs about hellfire and damnation and all the things we would need to do to avoid that awful fate. I'll give you a hint. Being a Unitarian was not on the list. We did not find those people to be welcoming at all. In fact, we crossed the street to get away from them. We left Mount Airy the next day, but the memory of Cousin Emma has stayed with me. Who was this woman? Was she just an eccentric older lady? Possibly. Was she portraying a certain Southern stereotype? Maybe. But I'll tell you one thing that I know to be true about Cousin Emma. She was an extravagant welcome. She was a stop all the traffic, invite two complete strangers to my house kind of welcome. In Cousin Emma's mind, Bob and I were a welcoming emergency. And I cannot stress enough how good it felt to be welcomed in that way. I don't typically carry business cards in my wallet because my wallet is full of credit cards, ID cards, membership cards, medical cards, vaccination cards. You get the picture. But it's now over a year later, and I'm still carrying Cousin Emma's business card in my wallet. I hope to return to Mount Airy one day. I want some more of Cousin Emma. I want to stay at her B&B. I want to meet her spoiled dog. I want to go to her church fundraiser. And I'm sure I would feel a bit awkward at her church, but I feel also that I would be warmly welcomed there. For most people, I think it provokes some degree of anxiety to go to a church for the first time. You aren't familiar with the surroundings, or the service, or the people. 7 years ago, I was spending the winter here in Venice while Bob was still working in Boston. Knowing that we would soon be relocating to Venice, I decided to visit a couple of local churches to try to find the best fit for us. I was church shopping just like our new friend Ron here. After attending the first church for a few weeks, I came to the conclusion that it did not feel welcoming to me at all. Yukov was the second church that I tried. I remember my first Sunday here quite vividly. I enjoyed the service, but afterwards I stood on the lanai for quite a while, holding my coffee, all alone, watching as church members happily chatted with their friends. Now, a couple of people may have delivered what I call a dive-bombing welcome. This is when you swoop in, say a few words, and swoop out again. Friendly? Yes. Welcoming? Maybe not so much. But here I am now, 6 years later, and Bob and I are firmly entrenched here as active members of Yukov. So what was it that sealed the deal? Well, it wasn't a what, it was a who. It was Stephanie Zornak, who approached me that first Sunday and initiated a real conversation with me. And she did it again the next week when I was once again standing alone and feeling awkward. Then she introduced me to her mom, Carol, and Carol Zornak introduced me to Carol White. And each of these three women returned to talk to me week after week, gently tethering me to this place. And week after week, I grew more comfortable being here. It wasn't long before I joined both Carols at mat making, which remains my favorite Yukov activity to this day. Now, some of you may be surprised to learn that Yukov's extravagant welcome to me was delivered by three of our shyer, quieter members. Maybe their own past experiences of feeling awkward in new places helped them to notice and feel compassion for someone else who was feeling out of place. Whatever it was that drove them, these three women are the reason that Bob and I are here today. And if you're glad we're here, you have them to thank. And believe me, they all have my deepest gratitude and affection. The difference between a church visitor winding up as a longtime active member or moving on after their first or second visit can hinge on just a single friendly interaction or a series of small friendly interactions. Each of us needs to keep this in mind if we want our church to grow. Some of you may be thinking, but Yukov is already welcoming. After all, we have a welcome table. Isn't that where all our welcomes get dished out? Well, a welcome table is very useful for collecting contact information, handing out name tags, but it's not enough. Each of us needs to personally participate in welcoming visitors. Not every extravagant welcome has to be like Cousin Emma's. Not everyone has Cousin Emma's oversized personality. And I fully recognize that for every person like me who was drawn to Cousin Emma like a moth to a flame, there will be a person like Bob who will want to back away slowly. In my case, 6 years ago at UCOV, the extravagant welcome was delivered with a much quieter approach, but it was no less effective and just as gratefully received as Cousin Emma's welcome. I truly believe that each of us is capable of delivering an extravagant welcome, but it needs to be customized for your own personality and comfort level. I hope you'll spend some time thinking about what your version of an extravagant welcome might look like. Whether it's a quiet conversation or a traffic stopping intervention, it could have a major impact on the future of that visitor and the future of this church. Let it be so. Our chalice is now extinguished, but I hope that our welcoming spirit will continue to burn bright. And with that in mind, please rise now as you are willing or able to join in singing hymn 118, This Little Light of Mine. Today's benediction is adapted from Be True, Be Well, Be Loving. We leave this gathered community, but we don't leave our connection, our concerns, our care for each other. Our service to each other, to the world, and to our faith continues until we are together again, my friends. Be strong, be well, be loving, and be welcoming.